Welcome to episode 26 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage global websites. In episode 25, we discussed demystifying hreflang X default, where we got into an article that was just written, and if you run an international website, you target different regions, and you use hreflang, you should really check that out. In this episode, we're going to discuss why international SEO is not being better integrated into the organization. As we suggested in the last two episodes, when teams collaborate, SEO and digital efforts become stronger, more effective, and more successful. But before we get into that, I want to discuss the recent article written by Adam Gent in the SEO Sprint about Conway's law on SEO. Bill, you brought this up. His article fits right into the series of topics that he articulates. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I thought it was timely because we actually did, I forget what episode, we talked about the problem with companies creating websites that mirror their organizational silo. And we talked about how that generates duplicate content, but I think this fits not only within, what we've talked about by, the startup CEO getting involved and the KPIs, and we talked about making SEO a team sport. So this was perfect. So what Conway's law, as Adam's article illustrates, is any organization that designs a system, and whether that's a website, software, whatever, will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization's communication structure. What was interesting is as you read it, he's got some great imagery talking about, everything from silos to monoliths to, a lot of interesting corporate and communication terms. And then what he ultimately suggests is what he calls triad teams, where the key stakeholders work together. So you've got dev and SEO and marketing and content and all these people working in harmony, no surprises to anyone, and just all sharing information. He also talked about both from his experience for doing this a number of years, and then he did a survey of a number of in-house SEOs, and he found that in every case where those SEOs indicated that they were having a successful tenure as an in-house SEO, they had a proactive conversations with the developers and the various teams, or had successfully reorganized their team structure to have more communication, more collaboration. And that helped them, like I said, in every case in his interviews, more effective in not only getting things done, but getting better outcomes from search. And so I thought that was really tied into these previous conversations that we had and was very timely. So take a look at that and subscribe to Adam's, the SEO Sprint. A lot of great information on the project management side of things related to search.
Yeah, it was really technical breakdown of communications and ended up with recommendations and the reasons, you can read into the reasons why. And it was interesting to see one of his recommendations is one that you've made to some organizations where they advise to get a technical SEO into the engineering team, or at least someone on the engine team be trained enough in SEO in order to understand what they're doing and how things affect SEO.
Exactly.
So that was really good. And it also reminded me of some of the trainings that we were put through when I was a manager in Siemens on communication, and big believer in communication and working with cross-functional teams and working on projects together always has a better outcome. All right, so let's get into the new topic here. We're going to be talking about why international SEO is not better integrated. And again, this comes from something that you've started writing on. So why don't you tell us what the genesis was of that idea?
So it was, the episode 24 where we were talking about why, making SEO a team sport, that why is it not better integrated? And we really were talking about all the dynamics of making a team sport around KPIs and weaving it in. And then we were having a conversation both during the podcast and after. And you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned is this idea of knowledge hoarding. We were talking about the Super Bowl that, a lot of people hire in SEO and sort of treat them, as if they're a quarterback and they're the only one that knows the plays. And then I wanted to drill down. And so as I really started thinking about this, why isn't it better integrated? And then we expanded it to why international SEO is not better integrated. I think the two go hand in hand. And so, of course, since I've been on this writing kick lately, I had to, cleanse my mind and get some thoughts out. And what was interesting about this is what I initially wrote was really the rants, the mad rants of former SEO and sort of those frustrations. And then as I stepped back and rethought and said, okay, really, what is it? What is the root cause? I think more than anything, the whole SEO is a team sport piece and exactly the communication element that Adam talked about is one of the root elements is our teams, our engineering, our content, our SEO, our marketing are all siloed. And because they're siloed, it creates a series of inherent challenges. I think one example I heard recently in a book I was reading on leadership was tension and friction, trying to use these cool, fancy buzzwords. But one of the things that it talked about or that I wrote down was this siloed nature, it's even more exponential internationally. So while we might have engineering and search and marketing and content separated, this creates a couple tension points. Number one, they're all doing their own thing. And because they're doing their own thing, they have their own KPIs, which is why we argued that they should align KPIs.
Can I stop you there for a second? So I've been thinking about this and I've been thinking about the article, and I think we've been going about this the wrong way. I guess, as with our history, we talk about SEO and departments. And I think what we should be asking is how can businesses shift to a customer acquisition mindset instead of talking about SEO first? Because when you talk about SEO, people, depending on your level of expertise, people go to title tags and different things. When you talk about customer acquisition, then everybody is involved, even though they should be involved in SEO. Does that make sense?
I think it's exactly it. And I think it's funny because in the shameless plug, in our SEO for developers course that I'm working on, I redid the intro to almost add like a mini rant of, why do any of us exist? And I think it's exactly what you just said is, the web is there. Well, I've encountered too many executives that thought it was nothing more than a digital business card, but it's there to interact with potential and existing customers. So I love that we're putting it forward is that we many times don't have a customer first mindset or a sales first or revenue first mindset because all of these other pieces, as we were talking about being fractured and siloed and that are all, because they're siloed, they're all doing their own thing. And the irony is, and this is one of the things that I talk about in some of my epiphanies, is trying to get people to understand the shared mission. And I think I'm going to tweak this article and put a lack of a shared mission. And that's exactly what you're talking about. If our mission is to sell or support or whatever it is, our website was, is there to do. We collectively need to do it. And all of these elements are exactly part of that. And I think as we look at that internationally, this is even more complex. And that reminds me, I need to post this on LinkedIn. One of my professors, my international marketing professor in my grad program, he and some other very brilliant people finished some research which basically found when you can combine local knowledge, so what the local market team knows about the market and unique attributes of a market with those prefabbed, if you will, campaigns and content and websites. And when you can meld them two together, that's when you get the 1 + 1 is 3. And it's just at the end of the day, it's exactly as you said. It's because we're on a shared mission. We're trying to sell, we're trying to support, we're trying to create awareness. And when we do that and we're well integrated, we can do more. And so there's not only that article where I talk about that research, I sort of de-geekify it. And then there's an offshoot where I wrote is this brilliant concept that they have applicable to web teams. And I think it sort of starts with that whole point that we have this shared mission. That brings us to the next point. So while we should be on a shared mission and we're not, in many cases, we have silos where people have different, KPIs. Again, we're all trying to solve the same problem, but because each of our respective managers have been given different sort of objectives to fulfill, they're thinking about those objectives. And that results in, which I have as a later reason, this less than optimal allocation of resources in both time and money. And then those also create constraints and priorities because, product-led or feature-led companies tend to prioritize features and functions and getting them out the door and figure they can bolt SEO on later. What I actually put in, which is now my third point, is the creative first mindset. And I think this one may take a couple minutes for us to kick about, but a lot of companies, especially those that are in luxury and fashion and where the creativity, the brand image, the brand association, where that's selling sexy and cool and innovative, they tend to be creative first. I mean, my God. And I know you've had this too. I've been in meetings. Like, I think we talked about this once before. I was in a meeting where I was called in by a board member and told to audit the website because the board member's wife was complaining that she couldn't find the handbag that she wanted. She couldn't find the brand website for searching for that handbag. And it was all the knockoffs and retailers. And she you're on the board. Why the hell can't I find this company? And what it was is the creative director was so fanatical and for rightful reason. Now as I'm a mature adult, I realize he was only doing his job of this creative first mindset, but he refused to allow text on the website.
Let me guess. He built the page in an image.
In images. Everything was in images because it's the only way they could render their brand specific font.
Yeah.
Because nobody had this font. And nobody was going to download it. And nobody's going to wait for that font to download. And so he won the argument. And when I come in and presented this, I did, Bill, exactly as you just said. I said at the end, okay, look, if this is just a slick version of your storefront, then be it. Take all that e-commerce nonsense off the website and just let it be a slick sheet. Just put the damn handbag or put the shoes or put whatever the product du jour is up there in its glory. Make it the equivalent of a slick ad in, the top fashion magazine in the world. I said, but if you're going to try to sell anything and if you want to be found, but to sell something, you have to either get people here or get found. You need to rethink this. And I mean, it was this heated back and forth between, engineering and creative and marketing, and the CMO was supporting the creativity and, using the designer in the third person. And it was an intense meeting. But again, now as an adult, I appreciate exactly what they were trying to do. In the end, money rules, and board members' wives rule. And so we rebuilt it. And they started selling and everybody was happy and they got more resources for the web. And I've had this. I mean, I've been called in, once as an actual expert witness and another time I couldn't be the witness because they were suing my parent company because the same thing. They were using these funky fonts and design attributes that there was no text. There was nothing, even the brand was sort of hidden. And because they were using, a campaign concept as the domain, we couldn't even get equity, a brand name deduced from the thing. So again, we understand this. And this is why, fortunately, in 2025, I think most people are somewhat over this. I still see it a little bit. Speed's still an issue, things like that. But this is why we need really good ways to make business cases to support this. And I've done this in places where I'm like, here's the numbers. And at the end of the day, if you don't want to sell, fine. That's the business decision you're making. But if you do want to sell, we got to find a way to collaborate. And I think the more the teams understand this, and I think, again, this is the maturity on both sides now, is the scenario I've always led with is, what if you knew these things that cause heartburn for search engines? What if you knew that and we could have all the creative greatness and we collectively figured out a way to have what you want? Obviously, we can't have, all the text and images, but, how do we compromise this? How do we really think and brainstorm ways to build this technologically, just like we did with, back in the days of Flash? The problems we have with JavaScript now, and, we're slowly starting to overcome these because now we have collaboration and discussion. And that's all we can evangelize, is trying to get people to say, if we can have this come together moment, let me teach you, you teach me, which it's a two-way street. The more we can understand the technology, the more creative we can be of saying, okay, yeah, we can feed these URLs through sitemaps. So maybe, our internal linking can, for lack of a better word, suck. But, at least we know that, okay, if we can't have A, we can have B, and B is second best. But I think that's there. And that directly ties in to what I think is this fourth point, which is this fundamental lack of understanding and knowledge, again, on all parts. Yeah. It's just not, you guys don't understand SEO.
Yeah.
But we often don't understand technology.
You brought up a point earlier also, SEO is not something you sprinkle on after things are built. I had a call today. Someone asked me, why is a campaign page not ranking in the UK? And they ran this campaign, they built the page, they never linked to it. It wasn't in the sitemap because they had blocked robots on the page, and they probably lost 2 or 3 days of the highest traffic they could have ever gotten for that new campaign.
Yeah. The other things are insertions and injections. This is insane where, this is the workaround, right? Where you may have inflexibility with your CMS, and especially, marquee or premium brands do this all the time. So same scenario. Hey, we had XYZ big brand agency created these 2 or 3 pages for this campaign, and we did a proxy setting, and so that they give the illusion that they're on our website, and they're not on our website. And because they're not actually in our CMS, because we've done, this reverse proxy to give the illusion that they were exactly the same scenario. Yeah. The pages might still be blocked. They're not in the actual CMS, so a sitemap was never created. Nobody even knew that these pages were going live, so nobody could submit them to Search Console. And so that's exactly that. We were able to overcome this with this company because one market in particular was always using the agency of the month club to create these campaigns. And so every time we had a simple guide, it's like, okay, we know we're going to use this reverse proxy injection method. So when you do it, A, we need the set of URLs. B, we need this so that we can submit them. We can put them in a sitemap. We can do all these things to get them found. And then the other big one is somebody had a brilliant idea, Friday night before the Super Bowl and totally retweaked the messaging. They didn't have time to write it all out. So it's one big screenshot with all the text. Boom, that goes live. And like you said, you lose 2 or 3 days of exponential momentum. And that's really because everybody's doing their own thing and people don't know. And, the reverse is true too. I can't tell you how many times I've seen, SEOs really stick to their guns and say, and maybe not be, technologically savvy and say, no, it must be this way, and it must be this one. I mean, one that I talk about in the article is the number of people who will send recommendations, like somebody's on AEM and then sends recommendations, insert this plugin from WordPress. and do this and this. Like, it's like they're not on WordPress. So there's nothing that turns off a developer than somebody who doesn't even know what tech stack they're dealing with.
Right, right.
So things like that, I think, again, it goes both ways. And so, I think the developers need to make sure they educate people. And in the article, I mentioned my son's first SEO job at a company other than working for his parents. I said, these are the things you must know by the end of your first day, and I will quiz you on them. And I said, 4 of these you should know before you even walk in their door. Like what's their tech stack? What CMS are they on? What are they using a CDN? Look at some redirects and see, how you perceive they're being handled. And then based on the CMS that they're using, you should have a fundamental understanding of how pages are assembled. And then, by the end of your first day, maybe it's the third day once you get done with all the corporate meetings, when you sit down with them, these are the questions you want to know. How do we do redirects? How do pages get assembled? Are there any hacks or any custom, elements that we have to our CMS? So then you can know when they tell you, oh, we're only allowed to have 300 or 500 or 1,000 redirects. And you're like, no, your web server or your CDN or whatever we're using doesn't have that limitation. So, when, to be pushed back. And again, by understanding the tech side of this, we can write better recommendations. We can have better integrations. And again, that's why having that search person either you're, someone on the project management side that it's, dual cool that understands them both, or actually having a developer. I think my son loved when he was a TripAdvisor, having dedicated search developers, meaning they understood the stack, they understood the goals, they understood search because they worked every day implementing search, technical requests. And I think, again, it's this communication and talking. The order of magnitude of this is exponential internationally because maybe you've got a central global dev team and you're, begging to get stuff in at the market level. You could have market level dev teams that are doing their own thing. There's actually nothing worse. And we've talked about this, I think, maybe 5 or 6 episodes ago when, you've already got tickets in to do it this way.
Yeah.
And then you have some markets get audited and, you get 4 other ways to do it by those agencies. And now you've got, tickets all wanting actions done with 4 different ways of doing it. So again, communication, collaboration, centralization, I think is key. And, then that helps, again, piggyback on this idea of resource constraints. I'm going to get my stuff in first without an understanding of one or the other. Like we talked about, how do we get our stuff in for free? It's piggybacking on tickets and projects. I think the last
knowing what the KPIs are for the developers. I mean, if you can
exactly
figure that out and piggyback on those,
because everybody. And again, these were some of the things that I put in that ranty intro was things like the speed of the site, right? We should, and I have a firm belief, this is sort of a segue rant from this, but if I was ever to run a company that had dev teams that had anything that was client facing, I would force those developers to use that. And I'm going to give you an example. I was doing a project for Disney and I checked into the Disney hotel. And then this lady, it was like her 5th day. She was fairly frazzled at the check-in. And I'm always curious about process. And she asked my name and that, oh, I see you here. And then there's a note, get their email address. And she's tabbing, tab, down through like 9 screens to get to the field to put in my email address. And she puts it in and then tries to save it. And it's giving her an error because something wasn't saved on like screen 2 or 3. And, anyway, so she goes through this. I see her getting frustrated. And in the end, she's like, F it. I'll fill it in later if I can. And, went back and gave me a smile. Hi, how are you? Sorry for the delay. Yeah, here's your key. Have a good day. So, and then I asked her, I said, you know what you need to do? you need to take a picture of this scenario, literally on your phone, and then give it to your manager and say, is there a reason that the second thing I'm supposed to ask somebody, their email address after I welcome and check their reservation, is on screen number 9?
Yep.
And forcing me to tab 9 screens deep and then back tab 9 screens back. It's the same thing when I try to get a veteran discount at Lowe's. Now it's automated on the self-help because you can't have a human check you out at Lowe's anymore. But they used the same thing, tab in. I'm like, look, hit key F4 and tab 3 times because I've watched them do it every time, having to go through this nonsense of, putting in my email or my phone number and having it verified that I'm yet verified still that I'm a veteran. And I think that's the key, right? Is anybody using this? Have you ever had your developer, mimic, a 3G phone and have them use your website? Have you ever had anybody, use it in real human scenarios or try to fill out forms or things like that? When they do that, you better believe they start fixing stuff because they're like, oh my God, this is a horrible experience. And now that I have to actually do this, I'm not going to go through this nonsense. And then they start fixing it. And I think the last thing I had was this lack of clear responsibility. Again, going back to point number 1, we're all here for the same mission. And when we have, fractures everywhere and there's no global, head of revenue, there's no global head of customer satisfaction, no global head of does the web work the way it's supposed to work? Are we meeting our search KPIs, our engineering KPIs, our revenue KPIs? And is it all working together? I think those were basically what I put in the article. Anything you can think of are reasons why, fundamentally, organizationally, why things aren't better integrated?
Well, they're not for sure, but you piqued my interest here. We do a lot with user experience, but we don't do it from an international point of view. And, SEO as a user experience factor, not just a search ranking, needs to be looked at. Like who owns the international user experience? Are they going to the right region? Are they going to the right page? And in different regions, there might be cannibalization within the same region, people getting to the wrong page and maybe SEO getting credit because the wrong page is ranking. I think there's so many of these things that if you take them in silos, you can look really good, but really provide a poor user experience.
Exactly. So the one you mentioned, are people going to the right markets? In 30 years, I have never had a company been able to present me one with a country language matrix of where people are supposed to go and any indication that anybody's ever checked that. I resist this weekly, the desire to build a tool that would check that for people. Just ping it from all over the world and what do I get? So that's one. Number 2, when Americans build things, or I'm just going to say when a country with people that live in a country build things, they tend to build it around what they know.
Yeah.
And if we quote Rumsfeld, there's the known knowns and the unknown unknowns and the known known unknowns and that whole rant of, all the things we didn't even think of. There's places where it's amazing how many places have different formats for even something as simple as postcodes.
So
and yet
I have a real world example that just happened a couple weeks ago. AgeGate.
Yeah.
So, working with the company, go to the site. I'm in the US. The AgeGate pops up. Guess what? It's in the European style of date, month, year. And my brain, it just shut me down. I could not proceed to fill out the age gate because I couldn't understand what was happening in front of me.
And when they don't tell you, oh my God, phone numbers. Like, I'm
right.
old school with phone numbers with, 3 digits dot the period, 3 digits dot 4 digits, right? I don't put brackets and, it's like, it's 2025. Why don't we have stupid forms that just let me put in the series of numbers and it forms it the way you want it?
Yeah.
I was filling a form out the other day for something. Oh, it was for my permit to go fishing in boundary waters. And it kept rejecting my phone number because I wasn't putting it in. It was going to be in Canada. It wasn't some format, but it wanted parentheses and a dash. But there was no picture. So again,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, hey, it's, I can just put it in whatever way that I
Right,
want.
right. Yeah, that's a
And,
great.
and it's things like this, ordering, reversing things. You start talking about, right to left languages. Oh my God, people still try to shoehorn things in. Again, there's so much of this, that could be there. I think that's a podcast we need to do where we talk about that. I mean, that's one of the things we've talked about, with offering a web effectiveness audit is, this laundry list of things that many don't even think about.
Yeah.
How, are you redirecting people the right way? Are we presenting things in currency? Another one that I think is crazy, when you surprise someone with, shipping or with currency or whatever, and it's like, surprise, we don't sell to you, but there's not even a link to go to that market. There's no provision to, move my shopping cart. Why? Because, this market is on Shopify and the other one is on Commerce Cloud. It's like things like this. There's nobody, riding herd on some of these fundamental things. And the other one you said, even I've tried for 5 years, Bill, to try to use bounce rate because of things like I'm in the wrong market. And it's interesting how many people either can't tell me that number. And then, we have some examples of that in our business case course. But things like this, these are things that I think people just don't do. And it's more than just search, because search might be bringing people here. Engineering might be presenting a flawless page, but something UX like that can be a revenue killer. So, amazing, amazing point that, it all needs to be thought of, and it needs to be thought of from a global perspective. So
And it's not just SEO, right? I think it goes back to that idea
exactly,
of how do we get more clients? How do we sell more stuff? Not how do we rank, or it's an SEO job, or it's. I don't want to say SEO is a team sport. I want to say like business is a team sport.
web effectiveness is a team
Web
sport.
effectiveness. There you go. Web effectiveness
We
is
need
a team
stickers and
sport.
t-shirts and
That's
banners.
what we need. That's what we need. We need a hat.
We need a hat.
I want to remind people of our free Facebook group where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You can also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
And so that's essentially how I do need to take out one or two references to SEO, but that's essentially how I closed out the article. I said, we need a collaborative model bringing all of the teams together. To break down silos, organizations should adopt a more integrated workflow between web development and the various teams. I recommend using Adam's triad teams approach, focusing on key areas. Core requirements in development. And again, this is not an SEO requirement. These are requirements from a UX, from everything, from IP detection to the right forms, the right fields in the right order, in the right place, security, performance. Because again, I think a lot of times people are building on these high speed connections. And what if we have, target market that the best they get is 3G? And so,
Or how
you
many
know,
people have never looked at their site on a mobile device?
exactly. It was funny. I was building something yesterday in AppSheets. So it's Google's low code. We can connect to databases and do that. And it's funny how fanatical they are about mobile, because I was trying to find a way to shift it to desktop view, because this app is going to be used primarily by people on desktops. And the default, and it was like a pain to switch it from mobile. So there are people thinking about mobile, but again, I don't want to steal the thunder, but there's an article coming from Otoko about these emerging markets and targeting them. And she used some stats in here that are just off the charts. Like in India, almost $2 trillion worth of e-commerce through mobile devices. So it's crazy. And then like 87% of all internet usage in many markets is on mobile devices. Yet, so many major companies could care less about making sure it's mobile friendly. Hertz's website was built when it wasn't mobile friendly. And everybody and a brother that's picking up from Hertz is on a mobile device. So again, it's craziness that should not happen. And I think, the other point I had is cross team meetings. You got to talk about this stuff. You got to make people think. You got to bring up these use cases. Did we try it? Wherever it is, when we're standing in line at the airport, we need to educate everyone on the fundamentals. I've been a fan, 10 years in the Marine Corps, we cross-trained on everything. And so in my companies, we've always forced people to cross-train. And I know you're a big proponent of cross-training. And it's not to make people complete experts, but just awareness so that you at least have appreciation for this and what it takes to do these different things, so that you're thinking, it's like, oh my God, if I just gave it to them in this format, or if I sorted it this way, it would make their life easier. And then the last big one.
If you try to, whiteboard out a process, you may find there's things that you don't even need to do.
Exactly.
People think it's really important. It might take 50% of their time as part of the process. And at the end of the whiteboard, you're like, well, did anybody use this?
Or the misperception. I think we talked about this, I don't know when we did, but the experience I have when I was doing enterprise audits, especially web effectiveness audits, I would ask the manager how different tasks are done, and I would ask a couple doers how the task is done. It was rare that the two were the same. The manager was probably parroting how they instructed it to be done, and then the people that actually did it were like, no, we don't do those 19 steps. Here was one where there was all these SEO criteria that was on the paper work order. People had to submit a paper work order that a project manager would enter. Here's the funny thing. That dev work order, all the SEO goodness that the SEO manager, swore that he was baking into the dev process, it was on the backside of the form. And guess what was happening? As always happens, you run out of a form. So people take the 97th generation of the previous copied form and went and copied it. And at some point in the evolution, they didn't copy the back.
Wow.
So all the SEO criteria that they were supposed to fill in was never being submitted. And there was people on the intake side of this that were new. And when I asked somebody, it's like, how come you didn't ask why there's no SEO requirements? Like, well, what do you mean? I've been here for a year. I've never seen a ticket come in with SEO requirements on the back. And then we chased it back to the tray in one of the offices where people had, again, the 97th generation of a photocopy where somebody didn't make it two-sided. So a simple thing of moving a couple of those requirements to the front of the page meant that they were always going to be included. And so, that's such a key point, is going through these processes occasionally. And another piece of this is QA and reviews. Again, as part of web effectiveness audits or part of search audits, the first thing I ask people, give me the last 20 tickets. Let me see, and let me look at all the active tickets that are in the dev queue. And I can probably count on one hand with 3 fingers missing the number of times I found a QA instruction, right? So in the absence of a QA instruction, it's either A, not going to be QA'd, or people are going to assume the QA. And with probably in the 80 to 90% of most functionality using software testing nowadays, if nobody wrote a test case, it's probably not going to be done. And so they're going to take the language. And I think I told you about the time where the ticket was, insert this canonical on every page. It was the Google Swedish fish example. And that's literally what they did. And because there was no QA ticket, there was nobody to pick up on the fact that, it should have been the unique. Everybody made the assumption, A, the developer knows what a canonical is, B, that it needs to be unique to the page, and that this is the test. And in the test case, we would actually give 2 or 3 scenarios at different type of pages of how we would test to make sure this was implemented properly. And the same thing, going back to reviewing processes. What is the process? And another big one that happens internationally is, did in making this change for market A, did we break it for the rest of the markets?
Right.
And this happens a lot in translation management, where, especially with parent-child relationships, right? Somebody will completely rebuild a page in market A, and then, like the US, and then when it gets saved, it overwrites the other two markets and sends a ticket for the localization team to localize it. So now we've deployed two English versions where there was already local versions that hadn't been localized. And it's because nobody knew that in the system you had to tick a box to not overwrite the existing, but there was still the mechanism to trigger the localization workflow. And again, it's just because people either don't know, don't care about the protocol or the downstream effects. And
My
so I think
experience is most people want to do a good job. It's almost always
they don't know.
unknown requirement, not being trained, or not having the right tool.
Yep. And again, we're back to your point number one. If people have a common mission, a common goal, and at least fundamental training to ask, is this going to break something for somebody else? Could it break something? Because I remember something about, like, we used to try to implant, when I would do these enterprise training programs, we would try to plant certain verbiage in people's heads: migration, JavaScript,
Alarm,
different words,
like,
so that they heard them. It was just to say, I heard whenever I hear JavaScript or refresh or rebuild or whatever word, that triggers, I should mention that to the SEO team. Mm-hmm. Or the SEO team should mention, hey, there's a new Google update. We need to go out and re-implant my trigger words to make sure the team knows that A, either this is cool now, or B, there's a new side effect that comes from it. So at the end of the day, I can't agree more that we're all in this together. Nobody purposely sabotages things. Either people don't know, they don't have time, or systems aren't conducive, for fallbacks and, double checks and rechecks and realignments. And so the more we can do that, the better. And again, this is why we've been advocating 26 episodes, and we're still, the whole big picture is about web effectiveness and ways that companies can, improve the overall effectiveness of the very reason why they have their website.
That's great. I think this is a good time to wrap up. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
All right. Any last comments? I think you might have done a good job wrapping up, but give you one more
I think
chance.
We're good.
Yeah. I liked it, the idea and the topic of the article. We can't stress this enough, that SEO shouldn't be done in a silo. And I really want to start training myself to start thinking about customer acquisition, sales, and whatnot, and stop using SEO as a term. But web effectiveness, we're gonna start using that.
Improving web effectiveness.
Okay, so what we hope you're finding value in our conversations. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really, really appreciate it if you just take a moment to rate, review the podcast. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us to keep making these and plan future episodes to match what matters to you. You can follow International Web Mastery on LinkedIn and X, and we have a free Facebook group that you should join and join in the conversation. We also have trainings. Bill's talked about a few. When is your next one going to be ready?
Should be in the next few days, at least a pre-sign up for the programming SEO for programmers, where we're looking at it from a programmer standpoint.
I think this is going to be one of most valuable, unique trainings on SEO written for developers. So you want to take a minute and describe what you're doing here?
Yeah, so I've been doing these modular courses, role-based training for probably 20 years. And this one, it came out of a discussion where I had yet another CEO tell me that their dev team and engineers think of this as a black box. So I wanted to demystify that black box and explain to them, how it works. And as I was assembling this, basically updating the presentation I've used in other corporate training, it realized that it was from an SEO's perspective, the same standard. Here's how search engines work and why you should care. And so I've repivoted it to make developers sort of through their lens and how they think, pre-identify some of the reasons why we have challenges. Why is, SEOs complaining about the engineering team and dev team, but by having them come to these realizations themselves is a total epiphany for redoing this training. But that's what it is. It's going through the things that they contribute to, everything from crawling to indexing, rendering. We're talking about even, how things get assembled to be shown in the search results. Why, when we're asking for schema and things like that, why that matters and how they need to think about it. Because again, it's things that I think a lot of people don't think about. We've had hundreds of arguments with people, just the simple order of injections, if a tag manager say, well, you need to go to all 47 tag owners and get their permission to move it down below the core HTML stuff. If we had built this in a better way, like I'm trying to change my vocabulary from the right way to a better way or more efficient way, that would have never been a scenario we would have had to address. And so that's what it is. It's really taking a root cause from a developer perspective on these things. So that's it. I'm very pleased with it. Exponentially added to my workload because my plan was to just, modify what I had, but retooling it, I think it's going to, like you said, it's going to be probably the only course like it. And I think it's going to really help give us a positive breakthrough in the hearts and minds in the developer community.
Yeah, I love the approach. Instead of how to, it's why. And, the audience for this is developers, not SEOs giving it to developers.
Right.
Cool. All right. Well, looking forward to seeing that. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.